Hello and welcome to the Wisepreneurs podcast. My name is Nigel Rawlins and I work with a range of women who are professionals in their field. They're often 50 to 60 years old who want to start their own business. In this podcast, I'll be interviewing a range of guests who will be able to tell you how they've done it themselves, and others who will give you hints and ideas and tips and maybe the confidence you need to go out and start your own business. Welcome to the Wisepreneurs podcast. In this episode, I speak with Laetitia Vitaud, a French writer and expert on the future of work, especially from a feminist perspective. Laetitia currently lives in Bavaria, Germany, though she plans to return to France next year after nearly a decade abroad. As someone who's lived in multiple countries, she brings a global viewpoint to examining work cultures and gender dynamics in the workplace. In our conversation, Laetitia shares insights from her latest book, which critically analyses our obsession with productivity and argues for a more humane approach to work. We'll also discuss the rise of entrepreneurship among older professional women who are leaving traditional corporate jobs to start their own businesses. Laetitia believes care work will be central to the future of work as climate change and ageing populations increase the need for relationship-based labour. She provides a unique perspective as both a leading thinker and a feminist advocating for a more just and sustainable work culture. This promises to be a thought-provoking discussion about envisioning better futures of work. Please join us for the conversation with the multicultural and multilingual writer Laetitia Vitaud. Laetitia, welcome back to the Wisepreneurs podcast. The last time you appeared was on number 9. So welcome back and thank you for accepting my invitation.
Thank you, Nigel, for inviting me a second time. Flattered.
Oh, lovely. Well, tell me, you're still in Bavaria? Last time you just moved to Bavaria.
Oh, yes. So that must have been almost 3 years ago. Almost 3 years ago. I'm still in Bavaria, but planning to go back to France next year, next summer. Mm-hmm. I've been away from my country for nearly a decade now. And strangely enough, Germany is the country that's made me feel completely French. And I want to go back for a number of reasons. The Germans, to me, are just too annoying. And I want to go back.
So what is it about them that's annoying you?
It's a good thing. They're very direct people, but they don't smile much. It's very bureaucratic. A lot of things are quite old-fashioned when it comes to, the way you communicate with the administration, like the tax administration. They still use fax machines. Otherwise, you just go to the post office and print everything. And little things like that. They're not very digital. I mean, it has changed, of course, but still way behind other countries, especially the UK, where I lived before. And yeah, it's very conservative in Bavaria. Lots of women at home or part-time. And as a feminist, I find it as a hostile environment. I love how beautiful Bavaria is, and I love the mountains, the Alps, and lots of great things. And I think you can have a wonderful life here, but I just probably miss my own culture. I miss France. And I know that as soon as I'm back in France, I will hate my own country again because I just love to complain wherever I am. I never accept things that could be different. So I have to just basically complain all the time. So I'm not naive about this. I know my own limit.
Sounds like an intellectual thing where you're questioning things. And maybe it's just the way your brain works, is you question the culture of where you are. But tell me, one of the reasons I think you mentioned in our last podcast, the reason you visit different countries is to learn new stuff. Was that the reason you moved to Bavaria the first time?
Yes, for my kids to learn the language. I'm actually half German, technically. My mother's German. And so I wanted to explore that side of my past or my family's past, although they're not Bavarian. So I learned that Bavaria is very, very different from the rest of Germany, which is not necessarily true on all points. But so my children now speak perfect German as well as perfect English. So it's another reason why I allow myself to think we can go back home. We've explored enough. There's another thing, what you said about learning about different cultures is still true. I still want to do that, but I also want to feel anchored somewhere, to have roots, not be one of those nomad people who just need their computer and a Wi-Fi connection and can be anywhere and are actually nowhere. They are nowhere because they don't form connections, strong connections with the people they're with. And I have that thing where most of my clients are either in France or in the UK or Belgium, for example, but not really in Germany. I don't have professional connections there. I don't really have that many connections. So I'm one of those anywheres, to use David Goodhart's term, who distinguished between the somewheres and the anywheres. And for a while, the anywheres, they had it all. They were the winners of globalization. I don't think they are anymore. I think you have to know your neighbors. I think you have to be anchored in a local community. I think you have to be more local now. And that's the future with climate change and all the things happening, the aging also. I think it's important to have strong roots. And I will still travel as a tourist, at least in Europe. I don't know how much I want to be on a plane, although I would love to visit Australia one day.
Oh, no, it's pretty laid back. We're spring here at the moment. It's a 20-degree day. Been lovely and sunny. The warmth is just beautiful. You actually speak 3 languages, don't you? French, English, and Germany, and your English is excellent. So how does that affect the way you think about things?
The fact that I speak multiple languages, it makes me question a lot of things. And I think at some point when you have those multiple cultures, you tend to be a foreigner everywhere you go. But it's also a good thing because you see things. It's like having hindsight all the time. Like, oh, I've seen this before somewhere else, or I've seen a different version of this, or, oh, I see that they take this and this for granted when in fact it could be different. So I think it helps develop other forms of intelligence that are quite useful.
One of the things we were talking about before we started on here was the fact that you have learned jiu-jitsu and you compete in that as well, and you do yoga. And as I've mentioned to you, some of our guests have a background in dance, music, and as an actress. Do you find that your jiu-jitsu determines things about how you react with people or do your work?
It's probably, jiu-jitsu in particular has probably made me more comfortable with how different other people can be, how different their bodies can be, how more mindful of them, of their needs, of their limits. When you hear jiu-jitsu, you think of fighting and aggression. In fact, it's much more an action-reaction thing. It's like you use the other person's strength to, for example, make them fall. But to do that, you have to understand how they work, what they plan to do, etc. So it's very relational. It's about the relation between two bodies and the minds that control them. So that's probably the one thing that I find the most interesting. The other is that it's made me confident, more self-confident, because I was extremely unsure of myself. I didn't like my body. I was very ill at ease all the time. And when you do a lot of sports, you have this chemical thing, you have all these nice hormones, endorphins, etc. And then you build strength, and the two go together, hormones and muscles. And you build confidence because also you develop skills. You learn to understand right and left a little bit better, to coordinate things a little bit better. And it's an extremely interesting activity to do. But I think you can have that with other things. Probably, I mean, if you're a dancer, you will have sort of the same advantages. Jiu-jitsu and martial arts, a little bit like dances. Like capoeira, the Brazilian martial art, it's a mix between fighting and dancing.
Yeah, no, I've seen that. It looks amazing. By doing other things with our lives and we bring it into our work and our relations with people, I think it helps us see things better. But the physical, I think, with the people I've been talking to on the podcast, it's very evident to me that it helps them with their thinking and helps them with their work, especially if they're a coach or a life coach. They have an insight, which is quite incredible. And I don't know whether it's because when you're dancing in a group professional dancer or an actress or a musician and you're performing in a group, that you're situationally aware, you're aware of the other person and you somehow flow.
Yes, that situational awareness is also something that we don't have enough of. We tend to forget our bodies, especially with our digital activities. We're all immersed in our screens and interactions with others online, and we forget we have a body. We forget where we are, and we forget to be aware of our environment. And perhaps we need more of these activities than we did a few generations ago because of our digital usage and the way we forget our bodies all the time.
Well, I think the main thing is, where does the body end? And I think that's a big issue at the moment, especially in a digital age, because our screens, I mean, really, are they a part of us and our keyboards and our phones and our iPads?
I think they are an extension of ourselves.
The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is I hadn't realised you've written 4 books now. You've just published your 4th book.
I can officially call myself a writer.
Yes. But they're all in French, though, aren't they?
Yeah, sadly. I mean, I would have liked to have especially the last one translated and the one before that, because I think it would match a lot of other cultures. It's not too anchored in the French culture. But it's not that easy to find publishers that are interested in translating essays. Very few essays get translated because novels, they sell a lot more than essays. So, no, I didn't get a publisher to translate it for me and publish it.
So what was the topic of the last one?
The last one was about productivity and how much of fallacy it is, how flawed it is as a way to measure the efficiency of work, the wealth of the nation, and basically how we should change it, not use it as an indicator to make decisions about economic policy, for example. So just very concretely, if you look at industrial work, the idea was that, 1 hour of work, you can measure the output. You have that output-input ratio, and it's easy to measure and apparently cannot be negotiated. It's the way it is, but it's not, because there's a lot of hidden work. There is a lot of invisible work, and there's a lot of unpaid work that's necessary to sustain the paid work that gets to be measured. And so when you look at it more globally, the productivity ignores a lot of things that matter. Ignore gender inequalities, ignore externalities, in particular environmental externalities. If you pollute the river a lot, your productivity will increase, but that's not a good thing. The true cost of that production is not measured, and the true cost should include the damage that it does on planet, the environment, the community, your family even. So it's a criticism of that indicator and basically all the economists that are so focused on just measuring productivity, and the way we also get obsessed with our own productivity and want to, click on articles that promise to give us the best morning routine to be more productive during the day, and how we use productivity in all kinds of moments of our lives that have nothing to do with production whatsoever. When did we get to think of sleep as something you need to be productive about? Or how did we get to think of, eating better to be more productive, sleep better to be more productive? It should be the other way around. We are productive to sleep better or to eat better. I mean, fundamentally, we need to reverse our priorities. Productivity is not a goal in itself. It's a means to an end. The end is to have a good life, not the other way around.
You wrote an article about Adam Smith's mum or mother. Tell us a bit more about that, because I think that's what you're talking about with economics.
Yeah, so Adam Smith is this Scottish thinker, a fantastic thinker who is said to be the father of economics. And he came up with lots of interesting ideas about the market, about the invisible hand of the market, about lots of things, how kind of magically on the market, you have people pursuing their own interests, and it leads to fantastic things like the dinner that you have on your table. So the dinner that you have on the table, it's an addition of, the work of the brewer with your beer, the work of the baker with your bread, the work of the butcher with your meat, etc. And it says, oh, how incredible, how marvelous, how magical. And that's all very interesting, but this blind spot, this complete omission of something invisible, which is that Adam Smith's dinner didn't come on the table all ready-made. Somebody did the groceries, somebody prepared that food if it had to be prepared, somebody did the dishes, somebody did all that work, and the dinner was not, the kind of miracle that happens on the market with brewers, bakers, and butchers pursuing their own interests. It was made possible by the invisible work of his mother. And Adam Smith was single. He was looked after by his mother for a very long time. I'm not sure when it is that she died, and how he survived without her. But it's interesting how that terrible omission, that terrible blind spot is something that is seen throughout the history of economics as a discipline, as a science, that it's as if there was no economy in the home, as if there was no value created in the home. And all those activities that are not on the market, that are not paid for which there is no visible transaction, because there are transactions in the home too, is something for a very long time was of no interest to economists. Today it is, and today there are also more women economists, and today it's something that is studied, but it's still not seen in GDP figures. It's still not seen in productivity figures. It's something that's not measured, so it doesn't really count. It's not something that is seen as something that matters by politicians. And so we still have that legacy of Adam Smith's terrible, blind spot, his mother.
He omitted his mother. And it's incredible, isn't it, that he never even thought about that part of it. It was incredibly blind to it. By you bringing it up, it made me aware of it, but I guess I've always been a bit aware of it anyway. Okay, well, talking about productivity, one of the big issues, I think I mentioned Rahaf Harfouche wrote a book called Hustle and Float, and she was talking about knowledge workers trying to do knowledge work, which is thinking, designing, solving problems, maybe writing things, designing things. But their productivity was being measured by the industrial paradigm. So what are your thoughts on that? And you mentioned, did you say you knew Rahaf or you've met her?
Yes, I've actually met her. She lives in France. She lived in Paris, so at least when I was there. So I've met her perhaps a couple of times, and her book is amazing, and she's been doing that work about cognition and attention, and also more generally an anthropological work about the way we view productivity. So it's very interesting, very close to the things that I write about. And she does it very well. She also does it very well in English. She's published in English, whereas I'm published in French. And she has a wider global audience than I do. So I completely share her view of how cognition and attention are really at the heart of everything we need to be worried about today and everything that's wrong today. I'm personally quite worried about how artificial intelligence is generating this tsunami of content. And it's really, there's this exponential growth of articles and pictures and things. I mean, there's so much of it. I feel overwhelmed all the time, and I feel it's very hard to pay attention to something. So I have to exert my will and just really focus and try to not think of all those distractions. But I find that it's increasingly hard to pay attention, to have this focused attention on one thing, to be mindful. And it makes it increasingly hard also for creative people to focus and produce their own thing, but also to be seen as producing something of value, because there's increased competition of content produced by machines. So it's a world where attention is going to be scarce, increasingly scarce. It's a paradox because our economy could be called the attention economy. It's our attention that's bought and sold, but there is less and less of it. A little bit like all planetary resources, like clean water and air. Attention is becoming this thing that's increasingly rare and increasingly valuable, and that needs to be protected because it's in danger.
You mentioned Adam Gazzoli in some of your writing. He wrote the book, The Distracted Mind, which I found quite fascinating.
Yeah.
As humans, there's only so much attention that we can actually give. I mean, our brains weren't designed for lots and lots of thinking because our brains are quite lazy in many ways, but they use so much of our energy. They take about 20% of the energy that we ingest to run the thing. So let's talk a little bit about trying to do knowledge work. If you're employed in a job and you're a knowledge worker, you've got to solve problems. How's that productivity being measured?
Yeah, so perhaps to go back on Gazzoli, because I love his work, and this very simple idea that we have ancient brains, that our brains haven't changed as much as we think it did, because, 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, we were the same biologically people. And our ancient brains are just not wired for the tech usage of today, where we have so many stimuli. There's so much stimulation that it's not something we can digest. The brain just cannot cope with it. We think we can work on multiple projects and receive hundreds of emails and have how many tabs I have open on my screen, but generally every day it's dozens of tabs that are open at the same time, and we feel less and less productive as a result, because our ancient brain just can't handle all this multitasking, all this stimulation, taking a big toll on mental health. There's more anxiety. I feel anxious when I have a lot of emails and a lot of open tabs. Stress, addiction, because there's this dopamine addiction of like many rewards when you get a new notification, but it's too much, and this cycle of addiction, it gets to a point where we're actually sick. Burnout, all those things are epidemics today. The multiple figures about how many times we check our phones. Some studies say 350 times. Others say it's 15 times an hour in your waking time. It's like you check your phone on average once every 4 minutes. So, but of course, the figures can be debated. I'm not sure it's representative of the entire population, but it says something about the way our cognition has been affected by all this tech, by all those devices. But when it comes to cognitive work, the way we think and create and make decisions and all that, coming up with new ideas, with fresh ideas, or combining different ideas like bricks of text and code, even made by AI, it's all about how much attention you can pay. It's all about how focused you can be. You need this focus to improve cognitively, but the environment you're in makes it nearly impossible because of this tsunami of text and code and images and produced by humans, by AI, by humans and in AI together. This production of content exceeds the entire amount of human attention available on Earth. There's more content produced than our added human attention can consume. And all of this takes a lot of energy. And all this adds up to CO2 emissions and global warming. I mean, what a waste, right? So I find it's really a kind of a threat. You mentioned Rahaf's book, Hustle and Flow. I think she also speaks about the theater of productivity, being busy for the sake of being busy. It's hard to actually have an idea of how productive we really are when we have an interest in seeming as productive as we can possibly appear to be. So there's a theater of productivity. A lot of it is fake. A lot of it is useless. A lot of it is bullshit. But we depend on that appearance of productivity because it's a way to signal our worth. If you say, oh, I'm being lazy or I have nothing to do, it's another way of saying you're useless, worthless, busyness for the sake of busyness, because it's a way of signaling our worth.
Let's have a little talk about AI. Obviously, there's a lot of people churning out AI articles, for example, on a website or online. I use a lot of chat programs. I use it to help me summarize things. Because I read a lot and I take a lot of notes, I often feed my notes in to prime what I'm after to help me do an outline. And then I might ask it to use some of my notes to fill it in. But if I don't edit it, it just comes across as just unreadable. So it would concern me if people were writing articles with AI and just churning it out and not really putting any effort into it. And that's just going to overload us all, because most of us are going to have to start churning through stuff to see if it's worth reading. Are you using AI for anything yourself?
A bit. I used it quite similar to yours. So, for example, I use it sometimes to summarize a long text. Let's say I will copy paste my own text into GPT and ask GPT to make a shorter version of it, and that works quite well. The other way around doesn't work well because it will just repeat things over and over and get completely unreadable. And with expressions like, it is to be noted that, like very rigid, boring phrases that nobody would use, and that makes the whole text unreadable. So I agree with you. It's a very powerful tool when you edit it, and especially when you feed the machine with the stuff that you want to use, because otherwise, if you ask, random questions, we'll fill in the blanks with either, faulty information or, basically stupid stuff sometimes. I think it works quite well when you ask questions about facts that are very well documented or things like that, because then all the information that was fed into the machine will make the answers quite reliable. It also works quite well for proofreading. Proofreading is another thing that I use it for. Like, can you get rid of all the typos or correct my grammar or make sure there are no spelling mistakes? So yes, I use it.
I think we should, but I think if we're using it for a purpose with good intent to put out good content, it still takes several hours to put an essay or an article together. I know it can take me probably 2 days a week to write 2 articles. Now, mind you, I've done all the reading. I have all my notes in digital format. So my main thing is working out a series of articles I want to write and then finding my articles, because I use a relational database. So if I've read 15 books on strategy, I've probably got 15 good pieces of information in there that I can pull in. But it gets beyond me to try and pull those 15 books together. I don't know how people wrote books in the past. But it may be that in the past they were less distracted than we are today. And if we think back, what we were talking about too, about our attention, if we go back, I imagine the hunter-gatherers, their day would have been fairly quiet compared to today and fairly simple. They could have been a lot more intelligent than us because of that, much more socially aware as well, and environmentally aware and situationally aware compared to today, where we're so distracted. I've been thinking about older professional women, and I think somewhere you wrote that from the age of about 40, some women are saying that they don't want to keep working in organisations anymore and they want to go out and work for themselves. Is that something you're seeing in Europe?
Yeah, it's something that we're seeing in Europe. There are more women entrepreneurs now than 20 years ago. It's close to 1/3 of all the companies created in France that are created by women now, which is more than it used to be, although among them, quite a lot of them have a male co-founder. So it's still a small minority. But among them, there are a lot of very small companies composed of just one individual. So freelancers, many more of them. It's hard to see it as entirely good news because as far as France is concerned, 2/3 of those female entrepreneurs make less than minimum wage or make exactly minimum wage. So it's when you think of, founding a company, creating a company, you think of something big, something that will not necessarily make you rich, but where you can hire people and develop a business, etc. A lot of those women who found businesses, they stay very small. They are paid less, they are negotiated less. And in fact, strangely enough, the pay gap among freelancers and entrepreneurs, the gender pay gap is bigger than it is in salaried work and among employees, which is strange because it's your own business. You charge what you want in theory. You have full autonomy over how you develop your business. It's not like you have a manager preventing you from getting a promotion or, imposing less pay than the pay that your male counterparts have. So in theory, it should be entirely, emancipated from all this bias. In reality, there is more bias and there's more inequality there. So I'm not sure I want to see it as entirely a positive thing. It's also something that's choice that's imposed on women who get harassed either after they come back from maternal leave and they get harassed terribly, or during menopause where they are treated very badly, or the combination of sexism and ageism at work takes a huge toll on them, and sometimes either they're fired or they just give up and try to do something on their own. And it's not something that is driven, or the decision to found a company is not necessarily driven by the will to create something on their own. It's just more like a, default mode than something that's entirely chosen.
Well, I must admit, it's much easier to have a job, provided
it is much easier. Yeah,
you get treated well and you're happy in the job and you've got good friends. The difficulty, I think, in setting up your own business is having some specialized knowledge that you can actually charge a higher fee for, so you don't have to do as much work.
It's just specialized knowledge, you're right about that, but it's also perhaps even mostly the network. If as a salaried executive, if you were an executive or a salaried employee, you have a strong network of people who trust you, they will trust that knowledge of yours is worth paying for. And it all boils down to how strong those ties are, those professional ties are that you develop throughout your career. And that's how you can build a business that's stronger and more powerful. And the problem is that a lot of women were unhappy at work as a salaried employee and decide, okay, I give up, I want to create my own company. They don't have that powerful network to build a business on. And that's women who find it hardest to make money.
And the difficulty from the sounds of it is they don't always know what to charge or how to set their fees. That can be abused as well. I've been notorious for undercharging. So when you hear what some people charge, and probably when they hear what some men are charging, they're probably going to be quite shocked for the same sort of thing that they're doing.
Which is why, to know more about that, you need to talk to other people about how much they charge. I have my own little clubs of freelancers and people I work with, and I try to create that environment. I call it an environment. I try to create those relationships where we can talk freely about money. Oh, how much did you charge for this? Oh, and how much did he charge for this? And etc. So just so that there are all those discussions about money, open discussions about money, and then we coach each other. Oh, you shouldn't accept this job for less than this much, right? And it helps to think of it together, to talk about it more openly. It's really crucial to talk about money.
Totally agree. So let's just talk a little bit about that. So if, not just so much about money, if, for example, you are 30 or 40 years old, working in a job, but at some point in the future, they may say, when I turn 50 or when I turn 60, I want to run my own business. What do you think we should be encouraging them to do between now and then that would help them?
different things. The first one would be to, even as a salaried employee, start working on developing your own skills, thinking of yourself as a craftsman or craftswoman who will always add new bricks to what they do and work on that also professional identity, on the story you tell about who you are professionally. This is a continuous work that you need to do and start doing, even when you're very comfortable with a job with nothing else to do but your work. It's always think of your career and your skills. The second is the network, and the network. Build strong relationships. Keep in touch with the people you work with. Develop this network continuously. Meet new people who may give you ideas about future activities, about future professional transitions. Try to have as heterogeneous a network as possible, right? Network composed of people who do different things, not just your peers, not just your professional peers. People who are a bit older, people who are a bit younger, right? A network that is stronger is a network that has a lot of variety built into it. Even, why not, a few people in other places, who live in other places, who might also give you ideas and options, new options, if you need to do something else, if you need to switch to a different positions. You find it very useful to have connections with people who are already where you want to be. And the third thing is money. How do you make it stay to not have revenues for a certain amount of months? Perhaps it means you need to have your house or apartment already paid for, or you need to have a lot of savings, or you need to, invest your money a bit better and think, of having that special fund for your future professional transition, whether that means changing jobs and paying for training in between, or whether that means creating a company and not having as much money at the beginning, but have that special fund for future transitions. And that takes also a lot of knowledge, because, we don't invest enough. We're not wise enough about the way we spend our money. A lot of us waste it. I waste it a bit too much. So this is definitely something also that needs practice and training and talking to others about it. By the way, though, I don't know if it's the case in Australia, but in Europe, there are a lot more training sessions and programs designed for women to be more empowered about money. Are there such things in Australia as well?
I'm probably not really well connected with what's going on in Australia. I find it difficult to find out what's going on. I do want to talk to somebody about finances or getting your finances straight, but I'm not too sure who to talk to. I don't know how to find them in Australia. I find it easier to find people in the world that I want to talk to.
Well, there's that French woman, in the UK, who, her name is Emily Belay, and she has this newsletter called Vestpod, VESTPOD. That's really amazing. She also works for the Financial Times and writes for the Financial Times. It's really a lot about, women and financial empowerment. So really an amazing company that she created around that.
I'll chase her up. You wouldn't believe how many people I speak to in England now, quite regularly on the podcast. They're doing some very interesting things, but that's why I like to look to Europe, I guess, living in Australia. It's just everything seems to be American. So I do talk to some Americans who are fabulous. As I said, it's difficult finding Australians I can talk to. So if they are listening to this, maybe they can contact me. I generally like to reach out to who have written a book, who have thought deeply about it. So in the knowledge area, I've connected with a couple of people who've written the textbooks on knowledge work. I will eventually talk to them as well. But yes, she sounds really good. So Laetitia, is there something else that we haven't spoken about that you'd like to talk about?
Something else that comes with cognition and attention and all that, and it's the care work, right? Perhaps we haven't talked enough about that. I'm convinced that care is at the heart of the future of work, because we're getting older, we'll need more of it, because also a lot of the cognitive work will be produced by machines. And what's left is the relational work of paying attention to each other, of looking after each other, whether that's children or older people, just each other in general. That's the main work of tomorrow, is basically care. And we forget it. Same as Adam Smith's mother, we forget the care dimension is in all the work that we do. Even when you're an accountant, there's care involved in, looking after your clients and strengthening the relationship, listening to them, listening to their problems, understanding there's care in numbers in Excel spreadsheets. Yes, there is care in there too. There's creativity and there's care. So whatever you do, there's this care element is more important. And it's caring for others, but it's also caring for yourself. And there again, with the combined effect of global warming and aging and population aging and your own aging, care is going to be even more critical.
Yes, I agree. And I guess we won't want to work with somebody who doesn't care for us or we don't relate to. So it's a soft skill that's going to be critical. Well, we should talk about, how would you like people to find you?
My newsletter, Laetitia at Work, so Letia at Work on Substack. Well, that's the main media that I have in English. A lot of the rest, the other things I do are mostly in French. So this is the one thing that's in English. I had a podcast. I should say I have a podcast because I haven't given up on making new episodes in English. I'm sure I will one day. But the last one was, I think, a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago. So it's been a while, but I will do it again. It is called Building Bridges. So there are some nice podcasts there if you want to listen to them. Most of them are still relevant today.
And are you using LinkedIn as well? Or?
Oh, yes. Yeah, you can easily find me on LinkedIn.
Right. I'll put all of these in the show notes so people can find you. Well, Laetitia, it's been fantastic talking to you again. It's almost like it was yesterday. We've just grown a little bit older.
And wiser, hopefully.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wisepreneurs podcast. If you've enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I'll leave the link in the show notes. And if you're keen to support the show, please shout me a virtual cup of coffee, as it will help me cover my production costs. Cheers, and catch you next time.